talking to Jeffrey Lipman, one of the sustainable tourism industry and the tourism industry's true visionaries for many years, at a changing point in his career. So it's probably best for me to ask Jeffrey exactly what you're going to do now and why.
Well, first of all, let me put this into perspective. When you say visionary for many years, what you actually mean, someone who is very old and probably should move on.
That too.
And that's what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to stay involved with the WTO. I'm going to step down from the formal role of Assistant Secretary General, which I've held now for 4 years. And I'm going to go back rather to where I was as an advisor for part of my time, working on issues related to the green economy and working from outside rather than from inside, number one. Number two, I've established with my good friend Ghassan Aidi, the president of the International Hotel and Restaurant Association, a foundation whose purpose is to advance tourism within the framework of the green economy. We use the buzzword sustainable tourism mobility and smart tourism, clean, green, ethical and quality. And we're going to use that vehicle to, if you like, push the framework forward, ask the challenging questions and provide some, it's pretentious to say thought leadership, but at least some serious thinking on the issue beyond the towels in the bath and the certification programs into how is this sector going to adapt to a post-Copenhagen climate regime where it's not a question of arguing we're going to play our part, but actually doing their thing to reduce their carbon footprints. So that's the second thing I'm going to do. The third thing is I'm going to move back to Brussels. I'm going to engage with a boutique public affairs activity, organization which already exists, working on EU and funding activities. And I'm going to put a tourism dimension into their business, which until now has not had it. And last but not least, I'm going to focus on China, because I believe China is really the next frontier in tourism. It's going to be the biggest inbound and outbound market by 2020, if not before. And I have a huge admiration for the way that country has thought through the development of its tourism and how it's using tourism almost as a model for stimulus programs. And I'm going to work to see if it can become a model for transformation in the green economy. So it's not retirement.
No, not retirement at all. It's a massive list of things to do. To recap, where do you think we are now in this movement towards the green economy in the tourism industry?
At the very, very, very beginning moment. All the past is prologue. We were not fast to embrace the green movement. We were not the first to look at corporate social responsibility, maybe because we weren't the worst offenders. But be it as it may, we're finally caught up to where the rest of industry is. And we are going to have to do a lot of changing if we really want to do, as many people say, play a leadership role in this green economy transformation.
I've heard you say that it is a long haul and that there's many years to go with the green economy. Now, one thing that we've noticed this last year is the fact that the major operators, the major people in the business are gradually moving towards greening up their acts. But of course that leaves the rest of the travel industry still at the beginning stages. How do you think that the smaller operators can actually deal with that?
Let me answer that with the three questions that you kind of posed. First of all, it will be a long haul because the concept of change to a low carbon economy is not just for the sake of going to a low carbon economy. It's to achieve by 2050 a stabilization in our carbon emissions and in the temperature of the Earth. So we have to see that kind of a time scale to achieve the ultimate goal. But as Lord Stern and others have pointed out, if you start earlier, it costs less, and if you're one of the early movers, you have a business advantage. So I'm seeing a time frame from 2012, when the original Kyoto Agreement has to be renewed by some Copenhagen-based understanding, to 2050, with a very important staging point in 2015, because that's when we have to reach some achievements in terms of the Millennium Development Goals, reducing extreme poverty, and 2020, when the first real bite of climate reduction is being of greenhouse gas emission reduction is being targeted, and where the Europeans are saying we will reduce by something between 20 and 40%, and others are saying we'll reduce by 10 to 15%. There's no fixed position on it. But so it's a 25 to 40 year time frame of change, starting with a serious set of agreements now. That's point number one. Point number two, yes, the big players are moving, but they're not moving particularly rapidly. If you look at what's happening in the companies who are part of the Global Compact, 5,000 companies, there are very few tourism players who have committed to the sort of transparency and the reporting and the social standards that those companies have committed to. And the tour operators are making their own rules. They're not necessarily following the broad industrial rules. So on your second point, they're starting to. We've seen a little bit. On the third point, for the 80% of the industry that's the small and medium enterprises, we have to give them the vision and the tools and the financing. And when I say we, it's part public sector, part private sector, has got to give them these things. And in the poorest countries, we've got to pay for it as well, because they don't have the capacity to do that.
Finally, I know that one thing that you've been very, very concerned with is the STEP Bank, the STEP Sustainable Tourism Programme for economic development and for pro-poverty, etc., etc. Where do you think that is at the moment?
That one is certainly embryonic. Another reason why Copenhagen is so important is that it's going to produce an immense amount of financing. People are saying at the moment that a key sticking issue is how much money is going to be put in place to help the poorest countries adapt to a regime of low carbon. Now, this could be trillions of dollars over the next 30 or 40 years. There's also funds coming out of the Doha development round, which is going to go to help small and poor countries become more effective in the world trading regime and more competitive. Well, if you put tourism into play, all of those poor countries have tourism as their key export, and it's an export where they have comparative advantage, because the kind of tourism people want is the undeveloped tourism, ecotourism, but it's the kind of tourism that they already have in abundance. And they are, for the first time, given an export in the services sector. The poor countries don't all have Silicon Valleys, they all have tourism. So that funding is what we should be setting our sights on. And if they get that funding, they'll have a market-related process for reducing poverty. And the most beautiful thing about tourism, as we all know, is the market comes to you. You put your pristine product up on an internet system, and the market ideally looking now at a new kind of ecotourism comes to you and you direct it around your country, takes money out of its pockets and it drops it in the community. There isn't another system which is so effective at moving the foreign exchange from the rich countries to the poor countries.
I think that's amazing. And I mean, I'm wishing you the greatest success with what you're doing, and I'm very grateful to have talked to you. Thank you very much indeed.